The most dangerous man in Chicago didn't fear the sound of a cocking gun. He didn't fear the sirens or the screams of his enemies. Alessandro Volpe, the Capo de Carpi, feared silence. Since the night his wife died and his son went mute, silence was the only thing that could hurt him. He built walls of ice around his heart, turning into a monster to protect what little he had left, but he never expected that the weapon capable of shattering his defenses wouldn't be a bullet. It would be a lullaby sung in a dialect he hadn't heard since he was a boy, by a woman who had no idea she was sleeping in the devil's den. The rain in Chicago didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Chloe Evans adjusted the collar of her trench coat, staring up at the iron gates of the Volpe state. It looked less like a home and, more like a fortress drawn from a Gothic nightmare. Dark stone, high turrets, and security cameras blinking red like the eyes of predators in the mist. Name? The voice from the intercom was metallic and bored. Chloe Evans. I'm here for the position, the nanny. The gate buzzed and swung open with a heavy groan. Chloe walked up the long driveway, clutching her bag. She needed this. Her bank account was overdrawn. And her landlord, Mr. Mitchkin. Henderson was threatening eviction, and her crushing student loans from a music degree she never used were suffocating her. The agency said the pay was triple the industry standard. They also whispered that the employer was difficult. They didn't mention he was Alessandro Volpe. If they had, she might have stayed home. The front door was open not by a butler, but by a man who looked like he wrestled bears for recreation. He wore a tailored suit that struggled to contain his shoulders. This was Mason Alejandro's right hand. You're the new one, Mason said, not asking. He looked her up and down, checking for wires, weapons, or weakness. He seemed to find plenty of the latter. He's in the library. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't touch anything. And for the love of God, don't stare at the scar. The scar. Chloe asked, her breath hitching. Move. They walked through a hallway that felt like a museum. Cold marble floors, Renaissance paintings of martyrs, and an oppressive silence that pressed against Chloe's eardrums. Mason opened a set of mahogany doors. Boss, the agency girl. The library was dim, lit only by the crackling fire and a green banker's lamp on a massive oak desk. Behind it sat a shadow. As Chloe stepped closer, the shadow moved, revealing Alessandro Volpe. He was terrifyingly handsome in the way a storm is beautiful before it destroys your house. Jet black hair, sharp cheekbones, and eyes the color of whiskey, held up to the light. But Mason was right. There was a scar. It ran from his hairline, jaggedly cutting through his left eyebrow, stopping just above his cheekbone. It didn't mar his face, it defined it. He was reading a dossier, her dossier. Chloe Evans. His voice was a low rumble like a cello played in a cavern. He didn't look up. 24. No criminal record. Dropped out of Juilliard one semester before graduation. Why? Chloe swallowed hard. Family emergency, sir. My mother got sick. And she died, Alejandro said, flipping a page. He wasn't being cruel. He was just stating facts. You have no living relatives. You have debt. You are desperate. I am qualified, Chloe countered. Chloe countered, a spark of defiance lighting in her chest. I specialize in special needs children. The agency said, your son Matteo hasn't spoken in 2 years. Alejandro finally looked up. The intensity of his gaze felt like a physical weight. My son is not a puzzle for you to solve, Miss Evans. He is a ghost in his own house. 10 nannies have quit in 6 months. 10 nannies have quit in 6 months. He screams. He breaks things. He bites. Why do you think you can survive him? Because I know what it's like to not have the words for your grief, Chloe said softly. Alejandro stared at her for a long moment. The air in the room grew heavy. He stood up, towering over the desk. He's in the garden. If he doesn't kick you out in 5 minutes, you're hired. If he does, Mason will drive you to the train station. Chloe nodded and turned to leave. And Miss Evans. She paused at the door. If you ever speak about my grief again, you won't make it to the train station. The garden was a sprawling maze of wet hedges and stone statues. In the center, sitting on a bench beneath a weeping willow, was a small boy. Matteo was 6 years old, with his father's dark hair and a posture so rigid he looked like one of the statues. He was holding a toy soldier, smashing it repeatedly against the stone bench. Clack, clack. Chloe approached slowly. She didn't say hello. She didn't use the high-pitched kid voice most adults used. She simply sat on the other end of the bench, leaving a respectful distance. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small wooden instrument, a kalima. She began to pluck the metal tines. A soft bell-like melody drifted through the rain-soaked air. It wasn't a nursery rhyme. It was a complex, melancholic piece she had written herself. Matteo stopped banging the soldier. He didn't look at her, but his shoulders lowered an inch. Chloe hummed a low vibration in her throat, matching the rhythm of the rain. Slowly, painfully, slowly, Matteo turned his head. His eyes were dark voids filled with a sadness no child should know. He looked at the Kalaima, then he looked at Chloe. He reached out a small, trembling hand. Chloe didn't flinch. She extended the instrument. Matteo touched the wood. He didn't smile, but he didn't scream. From the balcony above, hidden by the heavy velvet, Dr. Apes Alandro watched. He gripped his Scotch glass so hard it threatened to shatter. For the first time in 2 years, Matteo wasn't shaking. "Give it a guest wing," Alandro muttered into his phone. "And tell security to run a background check on her again. Go deeper this time. No one gets that close to my son that fast." 2 weeks passed. The Volpe estate was a study in contrasts. By day, it was a high-functioning criminal empire masked as a logistics corporation. Men in suits came and went. Phones rang and Mason paced the halls with a holster bulging under his jacket. By night, it was a moralum. Chloe had fallen into a rhythm. Had fallen into a rhythm. Matteo was difficult. He had terrors where he would silently thrash in his sleep, and he refused to eat anything that wasn't cut into perfect squares. But he was warming up to her. He still hadn't spoken, but he would now sit in the same room as her, drawing violent scribbles on paper, while she played music. Alandro was a ghost. She saw him mostly in passing, a dark figure getting into an armored SUV, or a silhouette on the balcony smoking a cigar. He ignored her, which suited Chloe fine. He terrified her. Every time their eyes met, she felt exposed, as if he could read the secret she kept, even from herself. But the atmosphere in the house was shifting. The staff, the housekeeper, Mrs. Rossi, and the guards were on edge. There were whispers of a turf war. The Moretti family was encroaching on Volt territory. One stormy Tuesday night, the tension snapped. Chloe was in Matteo's room. The thunder had woken him up, and he was curled in a ball in the corner of his bed, eyes wide with panic. The power had flickered and died, leaving the massive house running on backup generators that hummed low in the basement. "It's okay, Leo," she whispered, using the nickname she'd secretly given him. "It's just the sky clapping its hands." He was trembling, his breathing ragged. Nothing was working. The weighted blanket, the white noise machine, nothing. Chloe sat on the edge of the bed. Her heart ached for this motherless boy and for the father who was too broken to comfort him. Without thinking, she slipped into her own past. She remembered the song her grandmother used to sing to her. It wasn't English. It was a dialect from the old country, Sicilian, thick and sweet, like honey. And she began to sing, her voice soft and husky in the dark room. "Simar Rosa Lumaria Luzidu. Rosa and Pipinettu got married. The sea is calm and the sun is beautiful." It was an old folk lullaby. But Chloe slowed it down, turning it into a haunting ballad. She stroked Matteo's hair, his breathing synchronized with the melody. His eyes drooped. Downstairs, the front door slammed open. Alandro stumbled into the foyer, Mason supporting his weight. Alandro's white shirt was soaked in crimson on the left side. A drive-by shooting. The Moretts had made their move. "Get the doctor," Alandro gritted out, pushing Mason away. "I'm fine. You're bleeding out, boss," Mason argued. "I said." Alandro stopped. He froze. The house was sont, save for the rain and something else. A voice. It was drifting down the grand staircase. A melody. Alandro's blood ran cold, colder than the wound in his side. He knew that song. He hadn't heard it in 30 years. Not since he was a boy in Palmo. Not since the night his mother died, shielding him from a bullet. It was the song she sang while she bled to death on the kitchen floor, trying to keep him calm. No one knew that song. It was specific to his mother's village. "Boss," Mason asked, reaching for his gun, thinking there was an intruder. Alessandro didn't answer. Adrenaline flooded his system, overriding the pain. He pushed past Mason, staggering up the stairs, leaving a trail of blood drops on the marble. He moved like a man possessed. He reached the nursery door. It was ajar. He pushed it open. The room was lit by a single battery-powered lamp. Chloe was sitting on the bed, her back to the door, stroking Matteo's head. She was singing the chorus now, her voice soaring effortlessly, full of a pain that matched his own. "Dorme, sleep, my son, sleep." Alessandro felt his knees weaken. The walls he had built, the ice, the cruelty, the silence cracked. It was a physical sensation like a sledgehammer to the chest. Chloe gasped, spinning around. She saw him standing in the doorway, drenched in rain and blood, his face pale as death, his eyes burning with a mixture of rage and agony. Mr. Volpe, she stood up instinctively, moving to shield Matteo. You're hurt. Where did you learn that song? He took a step forward, ignoring his bleeding side. He looked dangerous, unhinged. Chloe backed up against the window. My grandmother, she taught it to me. While Andro closed the distance between them, she gripped her shoulders. His hands were hot and stained with blood, staining her white blouse. Who was your grandmother? Tell me. Lucia. Her name was Lucia. Chloe cried out, terrified. Alessandro froze, his grip loosened, but he didn't let go. He stared into Chloe's eyes, searching for a ghost. Lucia died in 1995. She raised me, Chloe stammered. She died last year. Alessandro's world tilted. The math didn't add up. Unless everything he knew about his own history was a lie, or unless Chloe was a plant sent by the Morettes to psychologically break him, using his deepest trauma. He looked at Matteo, who was sleeping peacefully for the first time in years, oblivious to the violence standing over him. Alessandro looked back at Chloe. The anger in his eyes faded, replaced by a terrifying intensity. He looked at her mouth, then her eyes. You have no idea what you've done, he whispered, his voice breaking. You didn't just sing a song, Chloe. You just broke my walls down. His eyes rolled back and the great Alessandro Volpe collapsed unconscious into the nanny's arms. The storm outside had turned into a deluge, hammering against the bulletproof glass of the master suite, like thousands of angry fists. Inside, the only sound was the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor and the shallow, ragged breathing of the man lying in the center of the massive bed. Alejandro Volpe looked different in repose. The ruthless lines of his face were softened by the fever that was currently burning through his system. His skin, usually an olive tan, was the color of parchment. The bandages wrapped around his torso were stark white against the dark silk sheets, a splash of red already blooming in the center where the stitches held his skin together. Chloe sat in a velvet armchair in the corner, her knees pulled to her chest. She hadn't moved in 4 hours. Mason stood by the door, his arms crossed his eyes, never leaving Chloe. The family doctor, an elderly man named Dr. Cipriani had come and gone, removing the bullet and stitching the wound, but the storm had washed out the bridge to the mainland, trapping them all in the estate. The doctor had left strict instructions. Watch the fever. If it spikes, pack him in ice. Keep the girl close. The boy won't leave the room without her. And it was true. Matteo was curled up on the foot of Alessandro's bed, asleep, clutching Chloe's cardigan. He refused to let go of it as if it were a lifeline. Chloe felt Mason's gaze boring into her. You can stop staring at me, Mason. I didn't shoot him. No, Mason rumbled, his voice low. But the boss collapsed because of you. He doesn't collapse ever. What did you do to him? I sang, Chloe whispered, looking at her hands. Hey, we're still trembling. Just a song. Alessandro hates music, Mason said, a strange look crossing his face. He hasn't allowed a note of music in this house since his wife died. And yet you are here, and he's alive. A low groan from the bed cut the conversation short. Chloe was on her feet, instantly crossing the room before Mason could uncross his arms. She hovered over Alessandro, her hand hovering over his forehead, but afraid to touch him. Water. Alessandro rasped. His eyes were still closed, his brow furrowed in pain. Chloe grabbed the crystal picture from the nightstand and poured a glass. She sat on the edge of the mattress, a boundary she felt terrified to cross, and gently lifted his head. Drink, she murmured. Alessandro's eyes flew open, even hazy with drugs and pain they were piercing. He focused on her face, confusion wearing with recognition. For a second he leaned into her touch, his cheek brushing against her palm as he drank greedily. Then clarity returned. He flinched away, pushing her hand aside. Don't, he growled, though the threat was weak. He tried to sit up, but a spasm of pain slammed him back against the pillows. He gritted his teeth, a sheen of sweat instantly coating his upper lip. You'll rip the stitches, Chloe said firmly. Her instincts overriding her fear, she placed a hand on his good shoulder, pushing him down. Lie still, Mr. Volpe. Alessandro stared at her hand on his shoulder. No one touched him. No one ordered him, but he was too weak to fight. He slumped back, his breathing heavy. Matteo, he asked, his voice rough. He's at your feet, Chloe said softly. He's safe. He fell asleep watching you. Alessandro looked down the length of the bed. Seeing his son's small form curled up there seemed to drain the aggression out of him. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting out a long exhale. "Get out," he said to Mason without opening his eyes. "Masso," and hesitated. "Boss, security protocols." "Get out." Mason gave Chloe a warning look that promised violence if she tried anything, then stepped out of the room, the heavy door clicking shut with a seal-like finality. Now they were alone. The air in the room felt thick, charged with the electricity of the storm and the unanswered questions hanging between them. Alessandro turned his head to look at her. The fever gave his eyes a glassy, predatory shine. "The song," he said. It wasn't a question. Chloe swallowed hard. It was just a lullaby. It was Sicilian. And he corrected his voice, dropping an octave, specifically from the village of Corleo, a dialect that died out 2 generations ago. My mother sang it. No one else. He reached out his hand, shooting out with surprising speed to grab her wrist. His grip was hot, feverish. "Who are you, Chloe Evans? And don't lie to me. I can smell a lie like I can smell a lie like I can smell smoke." Chloe didn't pull away. She could feel the pulse in his wrist against hers, rapid, erratic. "I told you my grandmother Lucia. She came to America. In the 90s she never talked about Italy. She hummed that song when she was sad. She taught it to me to help me sleep." Alessandro studied her face, searching for deception in the curve of her lips, the dilation of her pupils. He pulled her closer, forcing her to lean over him. The scent of him, sandalwood, copper blood, and rain filled her senses. "Lucia." He rolled the name around his mouth, like a curse. "Lucia Rossi." Chloe's eyes widened. Yes, that was her maiden name. "How do you know that?" Alessandro let go of her wrist as if burned. He stared at the ceiling, a bitter, humorless laugh escaping his throat. "Lucia Rossi, the maid who vanished." "Vanished?" Chloe asked, her heart pounding. "She didn't vanish. She moved to Ohio. She worked in a bakery. She vanished from my life," Alessandro said. High, voice void of emotion, which was more terrifying than shouting. "The night my mother was murdered, Lucia was the only other person in the house. The police said she must have let the killers in or she ran away in cowardice. For 30 years I have hunted for the woman who left my mother to die alone on the kitchen floor." Chloe gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. No, that's not true. She was the kindest woman I knew. She wouldn't." "You don't know this world," Alessandro snapped, turning his burning gaze back to her. "Loyalty is a currency, and everyone spends it eventually." He tried to sit up again, fueled by the sudden surge of adrenaline and old rage. This time he succeeded in propping himself up on his elbows, but the effort made his face go gray. The monitor beeped faster. "Stop it!" Chloe cried out. She moved closer, disregarding the danger. She placed both hands on his chest, feeling the heat radiating through the bandages. "You are bleeding again. Stop fighting the past right now, or you won't have a future to be angry in." Alessandro looked down at her hands on his bare chest. They were small, delicate musician's hands, and yet they were holding him down. The anger in his eyes slowly morphed into something else. Confusion, exhaustion, and a hunger he hadn't felt in years. He looked at her, really looked at her, not as an employee or a suspect, but as a woman who smelled like vanilla and rain, who had calmed his son when he couldn't, and who was now standing up to the devil himself. "You look like her," he whispered, his defenses crumbling under the fever. "Not my mother. Her. Who?" Chloe breathed. "The woman I used to be before the world turned dark." He mumbled his words, slurring as the exhaustion took over. He slumped back against the pillows, his eyes fluttering shut, but his hand reached out blindly and found hers again. He laced his fingers through. "Stay," he commanded, though it sounded like a plea. "Don't leave the room. If Mason sees you, he'll kill you before I can ask the questions." "I'm not going anywhere," Chloe said softly. She sat on the edge of the bed as the thunder rolled outside. She held the hand of the man who wanted to destroy her legacy while his son slept at her feet. She realized then, with a sinking feeling in her gut, that she was no longer just the nanny, she was a piece on a chessboard. She didn't understand. And the king was holding her hand. 3 days later, the rain had stopped, but the fog had settled over the Volpe estate, turning the grounds into a gray, ghostly landscape. The atmosphere inside the house had shifted from chaotic to oppressive. Alessandro was out of bed against doctor's orders, pacing the library like a caged tiger. He wore a black dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar to accommodate the bandages beneath and moved with a slight stiffness that only those who knew him well would notice. Chloe had been relocated. She was no longer staying in the guest wing. Alejandro had moved her and Mateo into the secure suite adjoining his own bedroom. He claimed it was for security purposes, but the staff whispered. Chloe sat on the floor of the secure suite building, a Lego castle with Mateo. The boy was calmer now, but he watched the door constantly. Suddenly, the door opened. It wasn't Mason. It was Alejandro. He held a mana folder in his hand. He didn't look at Mateo. His eyes were locked on Chloe. Come with me, he said. Chloe stood up, dusting off her skirt. She looked at Mateo. I'll be right back, Leo. Keep building the tower. She followed Alessandro into the hallway and then into his private study. He closed the door and locked it. The sound of the lock clicking echoed loudly in the silent room. He walked to his desk and threw the file down. It slid across the mahogany surface and stopped at the edge right in front of her. Open it, he said. Chloe opened the folder. It was a dossier on her grandmother, Lucia Rossi. There were old, grainy photos of a young woman in a maid's uniform standing next to a beautiful woman who looked strikingly like Alessandro. There were police reports in Italian, and there was a death certificate, fake, dated 1995. I had my best investigators dig into the archives in Palmo, Alessandro said, leaning against his desk, his arms crossed. It turns out the police report was wrong. Lucia didn't let the killers in. Chloe looked up, hope fluttering in her chest. She didn't? No. Alessandro said, his voice dark. She let them out. Chloe felt the blood drain from her face. What the security logs from that night show, the back gate was opened from the inside. By a code only the staff knew. Lucia opened the gate. The Moretti hit squad slipped out before my father's men could catch them. Alessandro's expression was unreadable. A mask of stone. She saved the men who killed my mother, and then she fled the country with a bag full of cash that was traced back to the Moretti family accounts. That's impossible. Chloe shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. She hated violence. She hated violence. She told me she ran away because she was pregnant. She was scared. Alessandro froze. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Pregnant? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Yes, Chloe said, her voice trembling. My mother. She was born 6 months after Lucia arrived in Ohio. Lucia said the father was a bad man, a dangerous man. That's why she ran to protect her baby. Alejandro pushed off the desk, walking towards the window. He looked out at the fog, his back rigid. His mind was racing, connecting dots he hadn't even known existed. If Lucia was pregnant and she worked in the Volpe household, and the timeline aligned. He turned around slowly. He looked at C, low with a new terrifying scrutiny. He looked at the shape of her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw, features he had assumed were just coincidence. Your mother, Alessandro said slowly. Did she have green eyes? Yes, Chloe whispered, like yours. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. My father, Alessandro said. The realization landing like a physical blow. My father was having an affair with the maid with Lucia. Chloe covered her mouth. Oh my God, if that's true. Alessandro continued, his mind working like a tactician. Then Lucia didn't open the gate for the killers. She opened it to escape my father, because if his wife found out she was pregnant, she would have killed Lucia herself. So she wasn't a traitor, Chloe asked Hope, wearing with horror. No, Alejandro said. He walked over to her, stopping inches away. The intimidation was gone, replaced by a profound, unsettled gravity. She was a victim, and you, he reached out his thumb, tracing her cheekbone. You are not just the nanny, Chloe. You are my niece, Chloe recoiled, stumbling back. No, that's insane. We don't know that for sure. We will run a DNA test, Alejandro said, his voice firm. But in my world, gut instinct is worth more than science, and my gut tells me that you are blood. If I am, Chloe started, her voice shaking. What does that mean? Alejandro's face shaking. What does that mean? Alejandro's face hardened. The mask of the co slipped back into place. It means you are in more danger than you can possibly imagine. The Moretts didn't just kill my mother, they swore to wipe out the Volpe bloodline, root and stem. If they find out you exist, if they find out there is another heir. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Suddenly, the intercom on his desk buzzed. It was Mason. Boss, we have a problem. Alejandro pressed the button. Alejandro pressed the button. Alejandro pressed Costin. We found a tracker, Mason said, under Miss Evans' car. It's active, and it's been transmitting for 2 weeks. Alejandro's eyes locked onto Chloe's. The softness vanished since before she got here. Yes, boss. It's a military rug. The kind the Morets buy from the Russians. Alejandro slammed his fist onto the desk, making Chloe jump. They know, he hissed. They knew who you were before you even walked through my gates. They used you. I didn't know, Chloe cried, backing away toward the door. I swear I didn't know. It doesn't matter if you knew. Alessandro roared to the beast, breaking free. You led them right to us. You who? You led them to my son. He grabbed her arm, dragging her toward the door. You're going into the panic room now? Alessandro, please. You're hurting me. I'm trying to save your life, he shouted back. But before they could reach the door, the lights in the house flickered and died. The emergency alarms began to wail a high, piercing shriek. Then a sound that made Alejandro's blood turn to ice. A gunshot coming from the room next door, Matteo's room. Alejandro released Chloe and drew the gun from his waistband in one fluid motion. He didn't look at her. He looked at the door, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated violence. Stay behind me, he ordered, his voice deadly calm. If anything moves, you drop to the floor. He kicked the door open. The hallway was dark, filled with smoke. Mate, Chloe screamed, rushing forward, despite Alessandro's order. Chloe, no. But she was already running into the smoke toward the boy she loved, toward the darkness that had finally come to claim them all. The smoke in the hallway wasn't gray. It was a thick, oily black that tasted of burning rubber and sulfur. It stung Chloe's eyes, blinding her, but she didn't stop running. Her heart was a frantic bird, battering against her ribs, screaming one name, Matteo. Stay low, Alejandro roared, his voice cut in through the wail of the siren. He didn't look like a man anymore. He was a shadow, a force of nature carved from violence. He grabbed the back of Chloe's shirt, yanking her down just as a spray of bullets chewed up the drywall where her head had been a second before. Chloe hit the floor hard, the marble cold against her cheek. Debris rained down on her, plaster dust and splinters of wood. Don't move, Alejandro commanded. He rose to a crouch, his gun extended. At the end of the hall, a figure emerged from the smoke, a man in tactical gear, a gas mask obscuring his face. The intruder raised a rifle. Alejandro didn't hesitate. He fired twice. Pop, pop. The sounds were sickeningly wet. The intruder crumpled to the floor without a sound. Alejandro turned back to Chloe, his face smeared with soot, his eyes wild. Move now. He hauled her up, shielding her body with his own, as they pushed toward the nursery. The door to Matteo's room had been kicked in. The wood was splintered around the lock. Leo! Chloe screamed, coughing as the smoke filled her lungs. The room was empty. The bed was overturned. The lamp lay shattered on the floor. The window was broken, the storm outside howling into the room, whipping the curtains like ghosts. He's gone, Chloe sobbed, her knees buckling. They took him. Oh God, they took him. No, Alejandro said. He wasn't looking at the window. He was looking at the window. He was looking at the closet. He's a Volpe. We don't run. We hide. He holstered his weapon and walked to the heavy oak wardrobe in the corner. He tapped a specific rhythm on the from the wood. Tap, tap, tap. A moment of silence. Then a tiny terrified knock answered from the inside. Alejandro ripped the doors open, buried beneath a pile of winter coats, clutching his toy soldier so hard his knuckles were white, was Matteo. He was shaking so violently his teeth chattered, but he was alive. Papa, Matteo whispered. Dade, it was a sound so faint, so unused, that for a second Alessandro didn't register it, then it hit him. His son had spoken. Alessandro dropped to his knees, disregarding his torn stitches, disregarding the blood seeping through his shirt. He pulled Matteo into his chest, burying his face in the boy's neck. I've got you. I've got you. Chloe fell to her knees beside them, wrapping her arms around both of them. For a fleeting second, amidst the gunfire and the smoke, they were a tableau of a family broken, bleeding, but holding on. We have to go, Alejandro said, his voice rough with emotion. The panic room is in the basement. The east wing is compromised. He stood up, lifting Matteo effortlessly into his left arm. He shoved his gun into Chloe's hands. Chloe stared at the heavy, cold metal. I can't. You can, Alejandro said, his eyes locking onto hers. If anyone who isn't me or Mason comes through that door, you pull the trigger. You don't aim, you just pull. Do you understand? Yes. Chloe breathed, her fingers wrapping around the grip. It felt wrong in her musician's hands, a violation of everything she was, but looking at Matteo's terrified eyes, she knew she would burn the world down to keep him safe. They moved. The journey to the basement was a descent into hell. The house was swarming with Moretti hitmen. Alandro moved with terrifying efficiency. He knew every creak of the floorboards, every shadow of the estate. He guided them through the servants' passages, avoiding the main corridors. Twice they encountered men. Twice. Alejandro handed Matteo to Chloe, stepped into the darkness, and silenced the threat with nothing but a knife and the brutal skills of a man raised in war. He returned each time with more blood on him, none of it his own. They reached the heavy steel door of the wine cellar. Alejandro punched a code into a hidden keypad behind a rack of Mage's Barola. The wall groaned and slid open, revealing a concrete bunker bathed in blue emergency light. He ushered Chloe and Matteo inside. Mason, Alandro barked into the darkness. "Here, boss." Mason's voice came from the bank of monitors on the far wall. He was bleeding from a gash on his forehead, tapping furiously at a keyboard. "Perimeter is breached. Security is down, but the police are 5 minutes out. The Moretts are retreating. Seal it," Alejandro ordered. Mason hit a red button. The steel door hissed and slammed shut, the heavy bolts locking into place with a sound like a coffin closing. The noise of the outside world, the sirens, the wind, the gunfire was instantly cut off. Silence returned. But this time it wasn't the silence of grief. It was the silence of survival. The panic room was stark and cold, lined with shelves of supplies and a cot in the corner. It smelled of recycled air and ozone. Chloe sat on the cot, Matteo curled in her lap. The boy had finally stopped shaking and had drifted into a fitful, exhausted sleep. Chloe hummed the melody again, the Sicilian lullaby, but softly, just a vibration in her chest to soothe him. Alessandro stood by the monitors, watching the grainy black and white footage of the empty hallways above. The Moretti men were fleeing, vanishing into the night as blue and red lights began to flash on the driveway. He watched them go, his jaw tight. Then he turned away from the screens. He walked over to the cot, his steps heavy. He looked exhausted, the adrenaline finally leaving his system, leaving behind only the pain of his wounds and the weight of the truth he thought he knew. "Is he asleep?" Alejandro asked quietly. "Yes," Chloe whispered. She looked up at him. "Your side is bleeding again." "It doesn't matter," he said. He pulled a chair over and sat opposite her, his knees almost touching hers. The intimate act of the small room was suffocating. He looked at her for a long time, studying her face in the blue light. The grime and soot on her cheek didn't hide the fear, nor the fierce determination that had kept his son alive. "You held the gun," he said, sounding almost surprised. "I told you," Chloe said, her voice steady. "I would do anything for him." "I know." Alejandro leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He dropped his head into his hands, running his fingers through his hair. "Which makes this harder." "Makes what?" "Harder. The truth," Alejandro murmured. He looked up, his eyes tortured. "Chloe, if what we discussed in the study is true, if you are my blood," Chloe felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "You really think I'm your niece?" "The timeline fits," Alejandro said, his voice devoid of hope. "Lucia leaves. 6 months later, you are born. My father was a man of appetites. It makes sense later, you are born. My father was a man of appetites. It makes sense. But it feels wrong," Chloe argued, her voice rising slightly. "My mother, she never spoke of Italy with fear. She spoke of it with sadness. She left me a box of letters. I never could read them because they were in Italian, but I kept them." Alejandro froze. "Letters in my bag," Chloe said, nodding toward the tote bag she had grabbed before fleeing the bedroom. "It was sitting on the floor by the door. I always carry them. A superstition, I guess." Alejandro stood up and grabbed the bag. He rummaged through it until he found a small, worn wooden box. He opened it. Inside were a stack of yellowing envelopes tied with a blue ribbon. He untied the ribbon, his hands trembling slightly. He pulled out the first letter. He recognized the handwriting immediately. It wasn't his father's bold, arrogant scroll. It was elegant, looping. It was his mother's. Alando's breath hitched. He sat back down, reading rapidly, his eyes scanning the faded ink. "My dears, to Lucia," he read aloud, translating the Italian, his voice thick with emotion. "I know why you have to leave. I know what you are carrying. You must go, not to escape my husband, but to escape the life we are trapped in." He flipped the page, his eyes widening. "The baby is not Carlos." Alejandro read his voice dropping to a whisper. I know you loved the American soldier. I know you stayed only for me to help me with Alejandro. But now that you are with child, you must go to him. Go to Ohio. Find your soldier. Be free." Alessandro lowered the letter. The paper shook in his hand. He looked at Chloe, his eyes wide, the whiskey-colored irises, shimmering with unshed tears. "The American soldier," he whispered. "Your father wasn't my father. Your father was a man Lucia loved. An American." Chloe let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for an hour. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "So, I'm not." "No," Alejandro said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. It was the first time she had ever seen him truly smile, and it transformed his face, erasing the scar, the years, the pain. "You are not a Vulp. You are not my blood." The relief in the room was palpable, a physical wave that washed over them. The taboo that had risen between them shattered. "She wasn't a traitor," Alessandro said, his voice breaking. "My mother, she helped Lucia escape. She opened the gate. Lucia didn't let the killers in. My mother let Lucia out to save you." He looked at Chloe with a profound sense of wonder. "You are the legacy of my mother's kindness. You are the proof that she was good in a world that was entirely bad." Chloe carefully shifted Matteo on her lap and reached out, taking Alessandro's hand. "And you are the proof that a person can walk through fire and still come out the other side." Alejandro looked at their joined hands. He turned his palm up, lacing his fingers with hers. His grip was strays. His grip was strays, on possessive, desperate. "Chloe," he said, his voice dropping to that low rumble that made her insides vibrate. "Do you know why I was so angry when I thought we were related?" "Because of the danger?" Chloe asked. "No," Alejandro said. He leaned in, closing the distance between them. His eyes searched hers, intense and burning. "Because from the moment you sang that song, from the moment you looked me in the eye and told me I was wrong, I haven't wanted you to be my family." He paused, his breath brushing against her lips. "I wanted you to be mine." Chloe's heart hammered against her chest. "Alejandro, I am a bad man, Chloe," he whispered, his thumb grazing her lower lip. "I have blood on my hands that will never wash off. I am damaged. I am dangerous. But when you are near me, the silence doesn't hurt anymore." He waited, giving her the chance to pull away to run from the monster. Chloe didn't run. She leaned forward, closing the final inch. "Then don't be silent," she whispered. Alessandro groaned low in his throat and captured her lips. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was the storm finally breaking. It tasted of desperation, of fear, and of a passion that had been buried under ice for too long. He kissed her like a man starving, and Chloe kissed him back, pouring all the fear of the night into the embrace. For a moment in the cold concrete box deep beneath the earth, the Mafia boss and the Nanny weren't employer and employee. They were just two survivors finding the light in the dark. But the moment was shattered by the harsh beep of the monitor. Boss Mason's voice crackled over the intercom, sounding urgent. "Police have secured the grounds, but you need to see this. We found something on the body of the lead gunman." Alejandro broke the kiss, breathless, his forehead resting against Chloe's. He didn't want to move. He wanted to stay in this suspense, reality forever. But he was the capo. "What is it?" Alejandro asked, not looking away from Chloe's swollen lips. "It's a phone," Mason said. "There's a message drafted. It wasn't sent to the Moretz." Alejandro stiffened. He pulled away from Chloe, the cold mask sliding back into place. He walked to the console. "Who was it sent to?" "It's a number in D.C., Mason said. "Federal Bureau of Investigation." Alejandro stared at the screen. The blood drained from his face. "The Moretz aren't just attacking us." Alejandro realized, his voice turning to ice. "They are turning state's evidence. They are selling us out to the feds to save themselves. This wasn't a hit. It was a raid to plant evidence." He turned back to Chloe. The softness was gone, replaced by urgent, terrifying command. "We aren't safe," he said. "The police aren't here to rescue us. They're here to arrest me." The blue light of the panic room flickered as the heavy steel door shuddered. Above them, the muffled sound of a battering ram echoed through the ventilation shafts. The authorities, or the corrupt agents paid by the Moretz, were trying to drill the lock. Alejandro moved with the frantic energy of a man running out of time. He went to a hidden panel behind the water supply, ripping it open to reveal a narrow, dark tunnel. "This leads to the drainage system 3 miles out near the river," Alejandro said, his voice clipped and commanding. He turned to Chloe, grabbing her shoulders. Take Mateo, go. There is a boat waiting at the third marker. Mason knows the coordinates, and you. There is a boat waiting at the third marker. Mason knows the coordinates. Chloe, asked, gripping his forearms. I stay, Alessandro. Set his eyes hard. If the room is empty, they will keep hunting. If I am here, Entons, if I surrender, the hunt stops. They get their pie, their prize winner. You get your life. He tried to pull away, but Chloe held on. She looked down at the gun he had tucked into his waist. Bad. And then up at his scar, and finally into his eyes. No, she said it wasn't a scream. It was a simple, immovable fact. Alessandro growled in frustration. Chloe, this isn't a debate. You represent the one good thing my family ever did. I won't let you die in a cage because of me. You're right, Chloe said, her voice trembling but her gaze steady. I am the proof that your mother chose love over the life. She helped my grandmother escape. Now you have to choose. She gestured to Mateo, who was standing by the tunnel entrance, his small hand reaching out toward his father. Mateo just found his voice. Chloe whispered, stepping closer to Alejandro. Do you want his first memory of you to be a man who walked away, or a father who walked with him? The battering ram slammed again. Boom! Dust rained from the ceiling. Alessandro looked at the door, then at the gun in his hand, the symbol of the power that had cost him everything. He looked at Mateo, who whispered, Papa, come. The wall around Alejandro's heart, already cracked by a lullaby, finally shattered completely. He unclipped the holster. With a heavy thud, he dropped the gun onto the concrete floor. He took off his suit jacket, the armor of the dawn, and threw it over the chair. Mason, Alejandro said into the intercom, initiate the ghost protocol. Burn the files, all of them. It's been an honor, boss. Mason's voice crackled, filled with a grim finality. Go. I'll hold the door. Alejandro grabbed Chloe's hand and scooped Mateo up into his arms. Don't let go, he told her. They disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel just as the steel door behind them began to groan and give way 1 year later. The sun in Sicily was different than the sun in Chicago. It didn't glare, it embraced. On a cliffside overlooking the Tyrrhenian Sea, the air smelled of salt and lemon blossoms. A small stone house sat nestled among the live trees, far away from the noise of the city, far away from the headlines that had screamed about the death of the Chicago Mafia lord Alessandro Volpi in a fiery warehouse explosion. On the terrace, a man was setting a table for lunch. He wore a simple linen shirt and trousers, his sleeves rolled up. The scar on his face was still there, but the tension that used to define his posture was gone. Alejandro placed a bowl of fresh pasta on the table. Leo, lunch, he called out. A 7-year-old boy ran out from the garden, laughing, chasing a stray cat. Mateo didn't move like a statue anymore. He moved like a boy. Coming, Papa, Mateo yelled, his voice clear and bright as a bell. Alessandro smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes. He poured 2 glasses of wine and a glass of juice. Then he heard it, the sound that had saved him. Chloe walked out onto the terrace, carrying a basket of bread. She was humming the melody drifting on the sea breeze. It was the same song, the lullaby from Corleo. But she wasn't singing it to soothe the nightmare anymore. She was singing it to celebrate the day. She set the basket down, and Dunn walked over to Alejandro. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her in. You're humming again, he murmured against her hair. Old habits. Chloe smiled, leaning into his touch. Do you mind? Never, Alejandro whispered. He looked at his son playing in the grass and at the woman who had walked into the devil's den and played music until the devil remembered he was a man. Sing it louder, Alejandro said, kissing her forehead. I want the whole world to hear. And as Chloe began to sing, her voice rising in harmony with the sound of the waves below, the walls of the past were nothing but dust blown away by the wind, and that is the story of Alessandro and Chloe. It's a powerful reminder that no matter how high the walls we build around, our heart's love and a little bit of music will always find a way to break them down. Alejandro thought his legacy was violence, but in the end he discovered that his true legacy was the capacity to protect, to forgive, and to start over. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight the war, but to drop the weapon and walk away with the people who matter most. Wow, what a journey. If that ending gave you chills, do me a huge favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. Did you expect that twist about the grandmother? Let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new romance drama. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next.